Thank you very much for coming. Welcome to this evening's public lecture by UniSA's Thinker in Residence, Professor Sharon Parker. First, we begin with the acknowledgement of country. We would like to acknowledge the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians on the lands on which we live and meet today, recognising their continuing connection to land, community and spirit, and recognise that their lands were never ceded. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. Thank you. Now, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Ms. Judy Zelke. She's the CEO of the Australian Research Council. Judy is as I said, the CEO. She provides recommendations to the responsible minister in relation to which research applications should be approved for funding, which is a very important position, and she administers financial assistance approved by the Minister for Research Programs and provides advice to the Minister on research matters. Ms. Zelke has more than 4 decades of experience supporting the Australian research and innovation sector, having previously served as the Chief Operating Officer of the National Research Agency, CSIRO. Ms. Zelke was also previously a board member of several organisations, including the Queensland Reconstruction Authority, the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, Australia New Car Assessment Program, and the National Association of Testing Authorities, and the Joint Accreditation System of Australia and New Zealand. I welcome Judy to the floor.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. It's not every day that the CEO of the ARC gets to be in the room with 2 Kathleen Fitzpatrick recipients. It's a significant night for me to be here tonight and have the opportunity to do that. I know the program will commence tomorrow for the PhD thinkers, and that workshop is a significant event in its own. But tonight it's particularly great to have the opportunity to hear from Sharon in hearing more about the work that she's doing and its relevance to the centre. Now, quite conscious I'm standing beside the sign, Psychosocial Safety Climate Global Observatory. Now, Maureen was successful in receiving a laureate in 2020 and has been using that to actually create the centre and continue to drive its work. And it, over a 5-year period, it still has a couple of years left to go. The significance of that is that Maureen was actually successful in winning something above others that actually is doing work in an area that is so important to the future of not only our country but of the world, and the transformation work that goes on in relation to, well, just the change in our world in that regard. Maureen's success was particularly important because it also received the Kathleen Fitzpatrick Award at the same time. And it's with that funding that Maureen and her amazing team have done the creation of events like tonight, but also the workshop that will be held over the next few days. It's great from an ARC perspective to see the benefit that is flowing from those awards. Noting that Maureen and Sharon are examples of amazing women like Kathleen Fitzpatrick herself, who was an amazing female researcher at a time when it was very unusual for women to have such significant roles in academia and in research more broadly. And whilst we're seeing some change in that regard, we haven't seen as much as we would like in relation to seeing parity in that regard. And that's why events like tonight and the workshop over the next few days is so important. But I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to introduce, therefore, Dr. Maureen Dollard as head of the centre but also to start us off for this evening. It's very nice for the ARC to be involved in a very little way in that regard. Thank you very much, and please let me welcome Maureen.
Thank you, Judy, for those really kind words. It's really, really amazing that the ARC CEO is here. You know, that's outstanding. Thank you. The goal of the PhD Thinkers program, which is the 2-day program that's going to go on in the next 2 days, the goal of it is to build the next generation of women academics and advance interdisciplinary thinking. And through a competitive process, we have selected 14 women PhD candidates from Australia from wide-ranging disciplines: biology, chemistry, business, optometry, education, psychology, economics, and so on. And so here tonight are the PhD thinkers, and I wondered if they would like to just to stand up so that we can see how brilliant you are and so that we can all applaud you. They're all around here somewhere. Yeah, that's really great. That's really great. Really fantastic. They come from all over Australia, so we're so delighted that you've come here. That's amazing. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our thinker in residence, Sharon Parker. As has been mentioned, Sharon is an ARC Kathleen Fitzpatrick Fellow and John Curtin Distinguished Professor of Organisational Behaviour at the Future of Work Institute within the Faculty of Business and Law at Curtin University. She's also the Director of the Centre of Transformative Work Design at Curtin. Sharon is a world leader researcher on the topic of work design, as well as other topics such as proactivity, mental health, and job performance. Not only is she a recipient of an ARC laureate, but she's a fellow of the Australian Academy of Social Sciences and the US Society of Industrial and Organisational Psychology. She's recognised as one of the world's most influential scientists and social scientists in the 2019 highly cited researchers list released by the Web of Science Group, as well as the 2020 World's Top 2 Scientists list by Stanford University. This is amazing. Anyway, she's been cited over 40,000 times. I remembered that. She's been a great mentor and a role model to me and many others in the field. And like Kathleen Fitzpatrick, she too is a pioneer for female academics. I'm delighted to invite Sharon to give the public lecture.
Thank you so much, Maureen, and thank you, Judith, for coming. It's truly an honour to have you here, and thank you, and it's lovely to meet the PhD thinkers. Thanks also to everyone else for attending tonight's session. It's wonderful to be in sunny Adelaide. I don't know if it's always like this, but I'm certainly enjoying the weather today on Mental Health Day. It is today. So I hope everyone had a little moment to enjoy their mental health. So I'm going to talk today about work in the future. What will work be like in the future? There's a lot of discussion about this topic, and on the one hand, we sometimes get the dystopian perspective, which is that there will be no work and that we will need to have things like basic income, and we're going to have this very polarised society with a tiny number of people working and mass unemployment. There's also a utopian perspective, and in the 1930s, John Maynard Keynes, an economist, predicted that automation would lead to a leisure society. It certainly hasn't happened yet, but there are still people who are thinking that maybe the robots will do all the work and we'll just sit around and enjoy the pool. But I'm going to actually suggest that neither of these two perspectives is quite the best way of thinking about the future of work, because really all of the analyses suggest that it's not so much whole jobs that are going to be eradicated, but tasks within jobs. And that's significant because it means that work is going to change rather than be eradicated. So I'm going to talk today about 3 broad buckets of change, and I'm going to focus on some of the risks of those change. This does not mean that I'm a Luddite and that I'm anti-development and technology, But I think we've got a lot of advocates out there already for the opportunities that come with digitalisation and globalisation. I want to highlight some of the risks and how some of those might be mitigated. So I'm going to talk about changes in what and how we work, changes in where and when we work, and I'm going to talk about changes in the who of work. So that is the plan. So let's start with changes in what and how we work. And of course, I'm focusing particularly here on automation, AI, and digital technology and how it might change jobs. So as I've mentioned, it's not so much whole jobs, but tasks within jobs that are being changed. So one statistic is that right now, 30% of tasks within 60% of jobs could be automated. So what that means is we need to give a lot more attention to how we work with technology. So we've seen already the automation of physical labour, we're increasingly seeing the automation of cognitive labour, and of course we are seeing new ways in which humans and technologies work together. So let me turn to one of the first risks, and this is the fact that when we allow machines to make decisions in our workplaces, sometimes they make really bad decisions. So many of you will recognise these two airplane clashes. This is the Boeing 737 MAX. So what happened on the first Lion Air flight went down. Several hundred people were killed in that incident. And what actually had happened was that Boeing had introduced a bigger engine into their aircraft, trying to be competitive, and it made the plane a little bit heavy. So they put this little sensor on the plane that would detect if the plane started tilting up a bit too much, right? And then it would pull it down. So this was all what they were trying to do. So in this particular incident, analysis of the black box suggested that what happened is that the plane tilted up like this, and the automatic system, it tilted up. The pilot tried to bring it down. But then it went up. Again, it corrected, sent it up. The pilot put it down. 21 times that happened, and then it crashed. And what, of course, in all these incidents is there's a little bit of pilot error, gets the first lot of attention. But what it turned out was they'd introduced this new system called the MCAS that would pull the plane down, an automatic system. And you might think, well, why didn't the pilot just override this system? Well, the pilot didn't even know this system was in place. Boeing had put this system in place, and they did so without training the pilots, because that would have cost a lot of money and slowed everything down. And they hadn't even actually told the pilots that this new automatic software was implemented in the planes. After that incident, they thought, oh, we better tell the pilots about it. So they did actually then put it into the manuals and so on. But then you see 6 months later, a similar incident happened again. And at that point, they put it into the manuals, but they hadn't done any simulation training or anything like that. And one pilot is quoted as saying there was more information in the media about the MCAS than what we actually got from Boeing. Then, of course, by the time 2 accidents have happened, people realised that there was a big problem with this automatic system, and the planes were grounded. What fundamentally happened here is that the technology left the human out of the loop. The human worker was the pilot. The pilot was unaware and untrained, and was not able to correct the automation when it made a bad decision. It turned out the sensor was faulty, and that's why it kept pulling the plane down. So we need to design future work to keep humans in the loop of the work. Another example is machines making biased decisions. And I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with these sorts of biases that are emerging. We think that we're going to use AI and these sorts of technological systems to make fairer decisions, because after all, it's all objective. But of course, in fact, these systems accelerate sometimes the bias because they draw on existing databases. So in this case, for example, Google was automatically sending high-paid job adverts to people who historically had high-paid jobs, who of course are men. So these sorts of biases actually can accelerate division in society, and there's lots of examples like this. Black people being put into jail for longer, missing out on healthcare, etc. So we need to make sure we understand the effects, the potential negative effects of these sorts of technologies, and design them out of the system. There's also, we always think that technology is there to improve productivity, and certainly it can, but it can also be a massive failure. And actually, there's been some analysis of IBM Watson, which was used in healthcare. Massive investments, billions and billions of dollars went into the investment of IBM Watson in healthcare, which by and large, there are a few exceptions, but by and large has been a failure. And you can see that from that article there. I work with Professor Fiona Wood, who's from Perth in Western Australia. She is the famous burn surgeon who went to Bali during the Bali bombings and invented the spray-on burn skin. So that's who Fiona is. She's an absolutely fantastic person, and she says, so she actually tried to implement some AI technology similar to the IBM Watson in her burns unit, and she talks about how artificial intelligence will be artificial stupidity if we don't engage at the coalface with the work people actually do. So she found she couldn't get this to be sensible without massively working very closely with the other surgeons to get the AI to do sensible things. So AI disengaged from workers is fraught with error and bound to fail. So we need to be bringing workers into not just the use of technology, but the design of technology. What about loss of work meaning? In theory, automation takes the dull, dirty and dangerous work, leaving the most interesting work, and that can certainly happen. Some of us will have experienced that in our own work lives, but it can also take away work meaning. So this is an example of a piece of research investigating the use of Da Vinci robots in surgery. And what you can see there is a quote from one of the scrub nurses who basically said, you know, when they implemented this new system, we were only allowed to make the instrument tables ready and then at the end clean up. And we didn't really have a role in between. So they felt that their role was really degraded as a result of this technology. We ourselves have been doing some research on the automation of train driving in Western Australia. And our research shows how the job went from being a skilled train driver to a monitor of a screen. So your job is to watch the screen until the train breaks down, which is very rarely, and then you go and rescue it. But as you can see here, one of the workers says, we're the Band-Aid until the techies get there to fix things. Originally, train drivers were up there with airline pilots, and they were one of those careers everyone aspired to. Now we've forgotten we're the Band-Aids. In fact, people talk about how they used to be koala bears, so rare and special, and now they're just on the shelf Band-Aids. So we need to make sure as we create future work that we create meaningful work. Another risk is that we create machines, and I guess this gets a bit dystopian now, that actually control us and our work and intensify it. And the classic example of this actually is Amazon fulfillment centres, where people talk about, you know, either you behave like a robot or you're replaced by one. So there's a lot of very close monitoring of people's wrists. You know, they have this technology on their wrists that tracks their movements to make sure that they're working as hard as they possibly can with the shortest breaks and so on and so forth. We've also seen during COVID a huge increase in the sales of technology for surveilling, for monitoring workers. So we need to make sure that when we design future work that we're not actually going to cause more harm to people. So those are some of the risks ahead for how work is changing in terms of what and how we work. I just want to talk a little bit now about where and when we work and some of the risks. Of course, we're talking partly about remote and hybrid work as a really common form of people being freed from some of the traditional constraints of working in the office. But we're also seeing things like virtual surgery. We did do some research with an initiative called Hive. And what that's all about, it's about having some very electronic beds in particular wards of the hospitals that the patients who are particularly sick are put into, and everything is monitored, their heart rate and all those sorts of things. And then there's a group of doctors who actually, in this case, work down in the basement who monitor those patients. So there's a distance between what's actually happening on the ward and what they do down in the basement. In the longer term, it doesn't have to be people in the basement. In fact, these people are talking, it could be someone in India, because then you would get monitoring 24/7, for example. So we're seeing those forms of virtual work also emerge. And of course, things like gig work are all sorts of work that have been enabled by people being free to work without the constraints of having to physically work near the task. So what are some of the risks? Well, we did a study during COVID where we tracked people and their work and their mental health over actually 15 waves. It says 6 waves there, so this is just 6 waves of the data. And what happened was that we saw that about 80% of people are in that green group. So this is a group of people who actually started out not very stressed, and actually their stress reduced over time. In other words, they sort of adapted. They got used to working from home and they were fine. But there were 20% of people who were in that high stress group. So they start way higher and actually their stress goes up and then it sort of stays high. So these are all people working from home. So what is it that explains which group you are in? So what our research showed was that if you are in work that's really boring and a bit meaningless, you're much more likely to be in that top red group. If you're in work that's closely monitored, so in other words, somebody's sort of watching you either with a camera or you've got a boss calling up and checking on you all the time, which happened quite a bit for some people during COVID. Or if you've got a really, really high workload, you're much more likely to be in that high stress group. So the point really here is we sometimes think remote working is some sort of magic panacea that's going to make everybody's jobs great. And certainly it can help with some elements of work. But if you've got a bad job, it doesn't really matter if you're doing it at home or in the office, it's still a bad job. Another risk is, of course, now we're seeing the big growth in hybrid work. And just to give a couple of examples of some of the research coming out here, we found actually, we measured people's work experiences on the days that they were in the office, and we measured their work experiences and their mental health and stuff on the days when they were working from home. And interestingly, the only protection against loneliness that we found in our study was the support that you get from colleagues when you're in the office. So support that you get from colleagues when you're at home was good for job satisfaction and things, but it didn't help with loneliness. So there may be something quite unique about the support that you get when you go into the office, at least for loneliness. There are other sorts of risks, I think, emerging with hybrid work, and we're seeing more and more research around some of the risks, particularly for women. As you know, women still tend to do the majority of the traditional female work. I shouldn't even call it that, but cleaning, domestic duties, etc. And that can actually be accentuated with hybrid work because women are home, and so it falls more to them. So we can also see risks like that emerging. So again, we go back to this idea that whatever our new forms of work are, we've got to make sure we're really evaluating what is the impact of those new forms and always trying to create better work. A third example is something called algorithmic management. So algorithmic management is the fact that these days it's entirely possible to not have a human manager, but just to have be managed by algorithms. And the classic example of that, of course, is like Uber drivers. There's no human assigning them which rides. There's no human collating all their performance ratings that they get from clients. It's all done automatically by algorithms. And there was a really great article actually about some guy that got fired by an algorithm. And it was so deeply embedded into the structure of the work that the manager, the director, nobody could unfire him. So if you think about it, he's got his little badge to get into work. That wouldn't work anymore because he'd been fired, so he couldn't get into work, couldn't log onto his computer because all those systems shut. So he just could not work at all. And it's just an example, I guess, of how when everything gets automated, and I think we all experience this sometimes, when everything gets automated and something goes wrong, very, very difficult to undo the thing that goes wrong. We did a review of more than 40 studies on algorithms and what impact they have on the quality of people's work. And we found that on average, algorithms make work more intense. People have to work harder and they take away control, partly because you can't call up a manager and complain or change things. It's all automated. So that can lower people's autonomy. So one of the things we've got to really do when we create future work is not just think about efficiency. We've got to think about other aspects that are really important to human beings beyond efficiency. So now I just want to turn to the who of work. And I guess there's 3 changes that I just want to very briefly flag. One is, of course, with all these changes in where and when people work and what and how they work, it really changes the skills that people need to be successful in this environment. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about population ageing, because this is a critical thing that's happening in our world right now that we're not giving enough attention to. And I want to talk briefly about mental health and well-being. The first thing with future work skills, we have this little model, and anyone who's interested in job performance might be interested in this, where we sort of map what sorts of performance are important for people in organisations. And traditionally, we focused on this sort of box that's circled there. So we focus on the tasks that people do in their individual job that we can predict, that we know are needed. That's sort of what you get in a job description, right? But we all know that what you do in a job description isn't necessarily what you actually do in your work. And in particular, the world is becoming more unpredictable. So the idea that you can anticipate all the things you need and put them in a job description and have that work is increasingly not the case. So things are unpredictable. We need people to be agile. We need people to change and be adaptive. We also need people to be proactive, so initiate change, drive change, use their skills and knowledge in new ways. So that's one big trend. But we also are living in a world of much more connection and interdependence, some more complex networks. And we see it here with the PhD thinkers, the importance of you guys coming together and developing those networks. And that's more and more important in the world of work. So just take this model, and one of the things there's been, you can't read it, there's a whole bunch of papers that have said, what are the skills that we need for the future, for future work? And I've just mapped them onto this model. And what we would see up there in that mastery individual box are digital skills, right? We know that we need digital skills. We need people to be more savvy around digital stuff, and that's there. But as you can see from the fact that all of these other cells are filled out, we need a lot more than just digital skills. We need people who are adaptable. By the way, the asterisks mean that this was correlated with income in the McKinsey study that I've cited there. Adaptability is so critical in the future because things are going to change. They're already changing. So that meta capability of adapting is really, really key. And you can see some of the others: proactivity, again, creativity, risk-taking, these very human attributes are really, really important into the future. And what's also important, all those interpersonal skills of being able to talk to people and work as a team and have empathy, all these things that currently machines, they can mimic, but they can't actually do. The point of saying all this is, you know, if you look at where we're investing our money with future skills, it's all in the digital box. It's not that much, first of all, but what there is, it's all in the digital box. And I think the point I'm making here is we also need to create education and training systems, including universities, for that wider employability, which means creating those other skills and building those. So that's a skills issue. And another risk I think we have for skills in the future, this is another study from also robotic surgery. And what happened in this study, and it's a great piece of research, what it showed was that the surgical residents, so these are the trainee surgeons, really found it a difficult model in which to learn in. Because if you look at the traditional ways in which surgeons learn, you know, you've got this, the young surgeon will go in and start and get to a certain point, and then the senior surgeon will come and help them out and then leave them and off they'll go. This model is designed for efficiency. The most expensive person in the room is the senior surgeon. So the model is designed that the senior surgeon does most of the work and the resident, the trainee, watches. So they've got not much opportunity to try things out. They're really on the periphery when it comes to being involved. And actually, another challenge is that when they do have a go, it's magnified up on that big screen. So it's not a very safe environment because every tiny little thing they do wrong is up on a big screen that everyone can see. And so you get conclusions like this. These guys, they trained in top programs that teach robotic surgery and they suck. I mean, these guys can't do it. They watched it happen, but watching a movie doesn't make you an actor. You know what I'm saying. We're actually seeing this phenomenon happening in places like law, because all the algorithms are doing all the routine work. Okay, that's great. But where do people get that knowledge that comes sometimes from years and years of, you know, ploughing through complex cases and so on? So we're seeing this happen. So this is another risk for the future, that we may degrade some human skills. So we really need to understand more about how we could actually improve learning and development. Another big risk is the ageing population, and of course you can see that chart there of the projected growth of people over 60. The big issue is that and economists say this to me, this is not me talking, economists tell us we've got a much smaller working population who's got to generate enough productivity to support this large ageing population. And that's just not going to happen. So the solution that the economists advocate is that we need mature workers to stay in work longer. But what are we doing about that, actually? The average retirement age is currently about 55.8 years. So people are not really staying very long in work. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's bias against mature workers. That people leave because they want to maybe look after their grandchildren a little bit, but they don't have the flexibility, that we don't have very flexible working models, and so on. So we need to really be designing workplaces to attract, let in mature workers. There's a lot of bias against not even letting mature workers in because there's all sorts of stereotypes about them. And retain them. And then we need to make sure that they're healthy and productive when they are there. We're doing a lot of work on this. I won't talk through the model, but if anyone's interested, just let me know. And then the final risk I want to talk about is mental health and well-being. And as you would know, if you've had, and today is World Mental Health Day, so very apt to talk about it today. There's a bit of a crisis going on. There's a lot of worry about burnout. Workers' compensation claims that are due to psychological injury are the fastest growing category of workers' compensation claims, and they are the most expensive as well. So we've got some challenges from a mental health perspective, but it's not just workers who are not resilient, and it's not just this is still COVID. It's often to do with the quality of work that people have. And I've sort of given some examples of not very good quality of work that can drive poor mental health and well-being. And as Lucy Brodkin likes to say, and she's the recent mental health commissioner, we need to go beyond yoga and fruit bowls and actually look at the quality of people's work. And that's why we need to make sure that we don't create poorer work into the future. So we really need to train and develop our leaders and other relevant stakeholders to design better quality work. So what I've talked about so far is the world of work is really changing, but if we want productivity, safety, mental health, well-being, inclusion, we've got to really be a bit more proactive, I suppose, and think about how to achieve this sort of work into the future. One of the things that's really important is creating work that's better is entirely possible. So I just want to go back. I mentioned the example of the nurse who said that, who gave that quote that the role was completely meaningless because all they did was tidy up at the beginning and the end. Actually, in this particular study, the surgeon needed a bit of help at some point and he asked a nurse to step in. It turned out the nurse was brilliant at stepping in. And as a consequence, they actually redesigned the roles. And in fact, the nurses talk about the work as being better after the introduction of surgery than before. So this happened, but it was an accident. My point is we need to be thinking about these things at the time that we design the technology and at the time that we implement the work. So there are lots of risks ahead. We need to move from short-term, reactive, technocentric approaches where the focus is just on the technology to long-term, proactive, human-centric approaches. And there was a report written by the Select Committee on the Future of Work right back in, I think, 2018. And I love that they said, hope is not a strategy. We can hope these things will happen, but it's not a strategy. We really need a strategy around some of these challenges. We need to upskill people in work design, which is the topic of area that I do research on. I might, in the interest of time, not go through all this, but it's a piece of research where we actually measure how people design work, and we basically show people are pretty rubbish at it, and by and large they just like to design really crap work for people because they've got this mental hangover from the Industrial Revolution that the best work is narrow and simple, and you carve it all up and give everybody create an assembly line basically. So we've done plenty of research on that, and happy to take questions on that if you're interested. But two things that we're working on to help with this. One is our smart work design model, where we synthesise 100 years of research on what is good work, because we're talking about designing good work, what is good work, into this model of stimulating work where people have mastery, so clarity and feedback, where people have agency, autonomy, where we think about the relational aspects of work. Humans have a fundamental need to connect and belong. Does the work allow that? And this one I always say is the big one, where people have demands at work that are tolerable, that are manageable. I won't go through that in detail, but I do just want to show you one last thing. And this is there a role for ChatGPT? So we've been doing a little bit of playing around with, can this technology help us to design better work? So what you can see there is, if we just start with that figure right over there on the left, this is whether people design a job with nice, rich, meaningful tasks. And you see students are the worst at it. That's sort of what we'd expect. You see that human service managers, so these are HR people and so on, they're a bit better, but still not great. You see work design experts are pretty good at this. What do you think ChatGPT would be like at designing this sort of work? Not too bad? You're going to give me a number? So what you see there is they're pretty similar to experts, but only when you give them the choices. Actually, if we ask an open-ended question of ChatGPT, and we've got this little scenario which I'm happy to talk about later, if you just say provide effective strategies to solve this problem, you end up seeing that they become quite Taylorist, and I need to explain the scenario for you to understand what I'm talking about there. But bottom line is that ChatGPT can help, but you have to use it in a wise way with a bit of knowledge and education. So it comes back again to the sorts of skills we need in the future are more than just those digital skills. So let me return to that question I posed at the beginning. What will work be like in the future? And I don't think the issue is so much about unemployment, but it's more about the quality of work. Is it going to be that we're all living in the hellish workday of an Amazon warehouse employee? Or is it going to be like this geneticist that we've done research with, who works with this very cool technology called Patient Archive to help diagnose rare diseases? And he says the Patient Archive is just one opinion of many. So he uses the technology to do his job better, but he's not controlled by the technology. Which is it going to be? Well, I guess I like to end with this quote from John Homer Shah, that the future is not some place that we're going to, but one we are creating. The paths are not to be found, but made. And so I encourage everyone from all of your different disciplines to be thinking and creating a path of future work where we have quality work that's productive, safe, and meaningful for humans. So I will end, and I just want to do a last little advertisement for our work design conference. If I've excited you about the topic of work design, please come to Perth. We're a really long way from anywhere, but it's worth coming, and we have a fabulous conference in February. So with that, thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Sharon, for that very inspiring and brilliant presentation. We do have time for maybe 2 questions, if anyone has any questions of Sharon. Sharon? Yes, Judy, go ahead.
Given the focus on, basically efficiency and cost cutting that so many of us, tend to be pushed for, how do you deal with that when and have workforces actually or workplaces understand that by putting the time and effort in, they will get that in the end, but that they'll want to achieve new job design overnight. And end up with exactly some of the scenarios that you've got. What's the argument that you would present in a workplace?
It's a great question. We get it all the time. No, it's a great question. It's a really important question because it's the big barrier as to why people don't do this. They think it would be more cost effective to just, roll out the technology, not ask people and so on. There's a huge amount of research evidence on the value that you can get through creating good quality work from a cost perspective, actually. If you create meaningful work, people are more motivated, they're more creative, they work harder, they're absent less, they leave the organisation less. All of these things have got huge costs attached to them. So you can actually mount a really strong business case that investing in quality work is going to be good for the worker, but it's going to be good for the organisation as well. Now, you've got challenges. You've got senior managers who are only there for a couple of years before they move on, and all those. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's possible, and there's a lot of research that backs that up. And I think it's why I'm personally so passionate about trying to get some of that research out there, because I think we can really persuade people with evidence if they'll give us a chance. But yeah, great question. Thank you, Judith. Yeah.
And one more question. So this one right back there, yeah.
Hi, Sharon. It's lovely to see you again. My question is about the mature age worker space. How do we design an age-friendly workplace culture? And how do we strengthen relationships between a 5-generation workforce?
great question. And right in front of you is Carol Kurlick. Carol, who does fantastic research on this space. So you need to just lean across and talk to her. But we have a little model. We call it the 3I model. So just very briefly, the first component of the model is integrate. And the idea here is let's welcome mature workers into the workplace, first of all. So let's have inclusive practices it's include. I'm getting my I's mixed up. So the first I is include. So let's include mature workers through good selection processes, not job advertisements where everybody is, 17, all those sorts of things. So there's a whole bunch of things that you can do to get more workers into the workplace. When you have mature workers, you have to recognise that as you change through your lifespan, your preferences and your needs change. Some things are not so good. Your eyesight declines, your hearing goes, etc. But other things are great. You accumulate wisdom, you develop more passion and interest around mentoring people. So we need to design work and cultures that support those changes that people have across the lifespan. So that's individualise, this idea that we should create more individual work for people. And the third I is integrate. So there is an integrate in there. And that goes to your last question about the fact that we've got more generations or more age groups in a workplace. So we need to give a lot more attention to how do we facilitate knowledge sharing, reverse mentoring across those age groups, because there's benefits both ways. And there's a whole bunch of strategies that you can go into to facilitate that sort of integration. So happy to give you some more details, but also, of course, connect with Carol. Thank you for the question.
Great, thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Please thank Sharon once more. Thank you very much, Sharon. That concludes the formalities of the evening. You're very welcome to please enjoy some refreshments at the back of the room and some nibbles. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for coming.